My name is Anaya Sen. I am 23 years old, born in London but raised between two languages and two homes. My parents came from Kolkata, but I have never lived there. For most of my life, I have been told that I am from somewhere else, even when I am standing in the place where I was born. I grew up in a small flat in South London, above a noisy bakery that always smelled of sugar and warm bread. My father worked as a civil engineer, and my mother taught Bengali to children from the local community. She said it was important that they did not forget who they were. But I was different from her students. I was one of those children who didn't quite belong anywhere. When I was small, my mother often spoke about her country. She called it Amar Desh, my land. Every evening, as she cooked lentils and rice, she told me about mango trees and long summer rains, about her mother's house beside the river. She said the air smelled of earth and cardamom, and that even strangers smiled when they passed you on the street. I used to close my eyes and imagine it all: the green fields, the yellow saris, the sound of people laughing in another language. But when she spoke, there was something in her eyes that made me wonder if she missed it or if she missed who she was back then. At school, my name was always mispronounced. Teachers called me Anna, and I stopped correcting them. It was easier that way. My mother hated it. She said, "Anaya means caring. It is the name I gave you when I looked at your face for the first time. Do not lose it." But she did not understand what it was like to stand in a classroom full of children who laughed every time your name was read out. So for years, I became Anna. At home, I was Anaya, and outside, I was someone else. Before we continue, I would love to know, where are you listening from? Which city, which country? Share it in the comments. And if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to hear more every week. When I finished university, I thought I finally knew who I was. I had a degree in architecture, a small group of close friends, and a job offer from a design firm in central London. My parents were proud, but my mother's pride was mixed with worry. She said London was a place where people forgot their hearts. She told me to stay close to family, to remember the values of her country. But I wanted to build my own life, not live inside the shadow of hers. A few months later, something unexpected happened. My grandmother in Kolkata passed away. I had never met her, only seen her in old photographs, silver hair tied in a bun, deep eyes, a gentle smile. My mother hadn't gone home in 15 years, and when she received the news, she didn't cry. She sat still at the kitchen table, hands folded around a cup of tea that had gone cold. That night, she said quietly, "We are going home, Anaya." When she said, "Home," I wanted to ask, "Whose home?" But I didn't. Instead, I nodded. Part of me was curious. I had grown up hearing about this place all my life, but it had always sounded like a dream. Now it was a plane ticket. We arrived in Kolkata at night. The air was warm and heavy, full of sounds, horns, voices, the far cry of street vendors. I looked out of the taxi window and saw lights everywhere, yellow and bright, but behind them, shadows that moved like ghosts. My mother was quiet beside me, holding her small handbag close to her chest. When we reached her old family house, I saw a tall white building with peeling paint and an old gate. A woman opened the door. She was my aunt, though I had never seen her before. She hugged my mother tightly and then turned to look at me. "You look like your father," she said, smiling, but her eyes studied me. Too long, as if trying to find something familiar. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a rooster and the smell of incense. The house was full of faces, uncles, cousins, neighbors who wanted to see the daughter from London. They spoke fast in Bengali, and I smiled politely, trying to follow. I could understand a few words, but when I tried to reply, the words came out broken and strange. Everyone laughed kindly, but I felt small, like a child who had forgotten her own voice. Later that day, my mother took me to her old room. It was simple, with faded blue walls and a single window that looked out onto a mango tree. She said she used to study by that window every night before she met my father. She told me she had once dreamed of studying literature in Delhi, but her father didn't let her leave. "Now you see why I wanted you to have freedom," she said softly. In that moment, I saw my mother differently, not as the woman who corrected my Bengali or scolded me for forgetting prayers, but as a girl who once wanted to travel, like me. That evening, I walked through the courtyard alone. There was a small pond at the back, filled with lotus leaves. A few children were playing cricket, and their laughter echoed through the air. For the first time, I felt something quiet inside me, something that said, "This could have been your life too." But I also felt like a visitor, an outsider looking in through an old window. Days passed. The house was always full of noise voices, cooking, and music from the radio. My mother seemed alive again. She spoke quickly, laughed easily, and walked through the market like she belonged to every street. I followed her through narrow lanes filled with spices and flowers. People greeted her warmly, calling her Meena Dee. I had never heard her called that before. At night, I would sit on the terrace and look at the city lights. I thought about my life in London, my small rented flat, the gray mornings, the quiet. Here, everything felt alive, but I was invisible in it. Nobody here saw me as English, but neither did I feel fully Indian. I was something in between. One afternoon, while helping to clear an old cupboard, I found a small box of letters tied with a red ribbon. They were written in neat Bengali handwriting. My mother saw me holding them and froze. "Where did you find those?" she asked. I told her I had been cleaning. She took the box gently from my hands and sat on the floor. "These are from your father," she said. "Before we were married, he wrote to me from London." I sat beside her as she read one of the letters silently. Then she smiled faintly. "He used to call me the girl who belonged to two worlds. He said when I came to England, we would make our own small world there." Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. I didn't say anything, but I felt something tighten inside my chest. I realized that maybe I had always been living in that small world. They created half his, half hers, and somewhere between the two, I had lost sight of my own. That night, my aunt organized a family dinner. Everyone gathered in the courtyard. The lights hung from the trees, and the air smelled of jasmine. My mother looked radiant, her hair open, her sari bright red. I watched her talk and laugh with everyone, and for a moment, she looked like the woman in those old photographs, the one before London. I wondered if she missed this version of herself. And for the first time in my life, I felt a quiet ache that I couldn't name. Before I share the rest of my story, I need to know, where are you listening from? Knowing someone hears me, understands me, gives me strength. That night, I could not sleep. The sounds of the city floated through the open window, dogs barking, a scooter passing by, a radio playing somewhere far away. The air was thick and warm, but it wasn't the heat that kept me awake. It was the feeling that something was shifting inside me, like sand slowly moving under my feet. I looked at my mother sleeping beside me on the floor. Her face was calm, her breathing steady. The soft light from the street lamp outside touched her hair. I tried to remember her like this from before, but in London, she always looked tired. She spent her days working and her nights worrying. Here, she seemed lighter, as if the air itself made her remember who she once was. The next morning, I woke to the smell of frying onions and the sound of laughter from the kitchen. My aunt was talking loudly, and my mother's voice joined hers. I could hear the rhythm of Bengali words that I half understood, but fully felt. When I walked into the kitchen, both of them smiled. My aunt pressed a piece of bread into my hand and said, "Eat, you are too thin." Later that day, my cousin Arjun offered to take me around the city. He was a few years older than me, tall and full of easy confidence. We took a yellow taxi to the old part of Kolkata, where the streets were narrow and crowded. He showed me the river, the book markets, and the old tram lines that still ran slowly through the city. "You should come here more often," he said. "This is your home too." I smiled, but the words stayed with me all afternoon. Could a place be your home if you didn't know its language, its smells, its rhythm? I wasn't sure. I had spent my whole life trying to belong somewhere, and now that I was here, I felt even more aware of how foreign I was. When we returned home, my mother was sitting in the courtyard with a few of her old school friends. They were drinking tea and talking about the past, about teachers, weddings, and people I had never met. I watched her laugh until she cried, her face glowing in the evening light. I realized how rarely I had seen her like this in London. There, she moved through life carefully, always translating herself for others, never quite fitting in. Here, she didn't need to explain. That night, as we sat on the terrace, she said quietly, "I had forgotten this feeling. I used to sit here every evening when I was your age, dreaming of the world beyond this city. I thought freedom was somewhere else, but now I see I left behind something that I can never get back." I asked her if she ever regretted leaving. She was silent for a long time before she said, "No, because if I hadn't left, you wouldn't be here. But sometimes I wonder if I lost parts of myself that I didn't even know I was leaving behind." Her words stayed with me. I thought about how she had built a life in London, a life that I sometimes found suffocating, but perhaps it had been her way of surviving. The next day, we went to visit the school where she used to teach before she got married. The building was small, painted light green, with children running everywhere. When we walked through the gate, an old man came up to her and said, "Minadi, is that you?" He looked amazed. My mother laughed and nodded, and soon everyone around was smiling and calling her name. I stood there quietly, watching her become someone I had never seen before. As we left the school, she took my hand. "Do you see, Anaya? This was my life once. I thought I had to leave it behind to become something more. But life doesn't work like that. Wherever you go, it follows you." In the afternoon, a sudden storm came. The rain fell hard, loud on the roof, and the smell of wet earth filled the house. I stood at the window, watching the water run down the glass. My mother came and stood beside me. "In London, rain feels lonely," she said softly, "but here, it feels alive." I looked at her and realized that this trip wasn't only about saying goodbye to her mother. It was about finding herself again. That evening, while my mother was helping in the kitchen, my aunt called me to her room. The lights were dim, and she was sitting on the bed with an old photo album in her lap. She opened it and pointed to a picture of a young woman in a blue sari, standing beside a man in a white shirt. "Do you know who this is?" she asked. I looked closely. The woman looked like my mother, but younger, brighter. The man beside her wasn't my father. "That's your mother," my aunt said quietly. "And that man was someone she loved before she married your father." I froze. "She never told me," I said. "She wouldn't," my aunt replied. "Their families didn't approve. His name was Rohan. He wanted to go abroad and take her with him, but her father refused. He died in an accident a year later. Your mother never spoke of him again." I stared at the photo. The woman in it was laughing, her eyes full of light. I didn't know what to feel, surprise, sadness, or guilt. My mother had always told me to remember where I came from, but maybe she had been trying to remember too. That night, I couldn't eat. My mother noticed. "Are you feeling sick?" she asked. I wanted to tell her what I had learned, but something stopped me. I didn't want to open an old wound. The next morning, my mother went to the temple early. When she returned, she looked peaceful. "I said goodbye to my mother today," she told me, "not just at her grave, but inside myself. Sometimes we carry too much. We must learn to let go." I wanted to tell her that I understood, but the words stayed stuck in my throat. A few days later, our flight back to London approached. My mother packed slowly, folding her saris with care. I watched her from the doorway, feeling a strange heaviness. Before we left, my aunt handed me a small envelope. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was a small gold pendant shaped like a leaf. On the back, my name was written in Bengali letters. "She made this for you when you were born," my aunt said. "She said it would remind you of where you come from." On the plane, I held the pendant in my palm. My mother looked at me and smiled. "It suits you," she said. As the plane took off, I looked down at the city below, at the lights fading into darkness. I felt both close to it and far away. My mother closed her eyes, and I wondered what she was thinking about her childhood, her first love, her mother, or maybe me. When we landed in London, the air felt cold and sharp. The streets looked smaller than I remembered. At home, everything was quiet again. My mother went back to her work, and I returned to mine. But something had changed between us. She stopped correcting my Bengali, and I stopped hiding my name. One evening, I found her sitting by the window, holding a photograph. It was the same one I had seen in my aunt's room, the young woman in the blue sari. She looked up and said softly, "You found this, didn't you?" I nodded. She smiled faintly. "I was going to tell you one day. I thought I had buried that part of my life, but you cannot bury what made you who you are. He was my first love. He taught me how to dream. Your father taught me how to build. Both are part of me." I sat beside her, unsure what to say. Then she looked at me with gentle eyes. "Anaya, you will have your own story one day. You don't have to choose between my country and yours. You are both." For a long moment, we sat together in silence, the city lights shining faintly through the window. I thought about the mango tree, the river, and the old letters tied with a red ribbon. I thought about how strange it was that sometimes you have to leave a place to understand where you belong. That night, I wore the pendant for the first time. It felt light, almost invisible, but I could feel its warmth against my skin. I whispered my name softly. Anaya, and for the first time, it didn't sound foreign. It sounded like mine. It took me weeks to return to the rhythm of life in London. Everything felt smaller, quieter, as if someone had turned the world's volume down. I went back to my job at the architecture firm where the days were filled with numbers, designs, and meetings that stretched endlessly. My friends asked how my trip was, and I always said, "It was beautiful," though I never knew how to explain what had really changed inside me. Sometimes, on my way to work, I caught my reflection in a shop window and barely recognized myself. It wasn't my face that had changed, but my eyes. They looked softer, older, as if they had seen something that couldn't be unseen. At home, my mother had started cooking again real Bengali food, the kind she used to make before life became too busy. The smell of turmeric and cumin filled our flat. On Sundays, she played old songs from her childhood on the radio. I noticed she hummed along, half under her breath, like she was no longer afraid of her memories. One evening, as I helped her chop vegetables, she said, "When I first came to London, I thought if I spoke enough English, I could belong here. But the truth is, we can belong in more than one place. You don't have to choose, Anaya." I didn't answer then, but I understood her. The need to belong is a quiet ache, one that never truly goes away. But maybe belonging isn't about geography. Maybe it's about people and the stories we carry inside us. At work, my team began designing a cultural center for immigrants, a place for people to share art, food, and language. My manager asked if I could lead the project. I accepted without hesitation. For the first time, I felt like my background wasn't something to hide. It was something I could use to build something meaningful. When I presented the first sketch, I included a courtyard in the center of the building. It all reminded me of my grandmother's house in Kolkata, the one filled with laughter and monsoon rain. My colleagues loved the design. They said it felt warm, open, human. I smiled, but inside I whispered a thank you to the women in my family who had built courtyards in their own ways with love, with patience, with memory. One evening, after work, I took a walk by the Thames. The wind was cold, and the lights of the city shimmered on the dark water. I thought about my grandmother's pendant resting against my heart, about my mother's laughter in Kolkata, and about the mango tree outside her old window. I realized something simple yet powerful. I didn't have to choose one world over another. I was the bridge between them. That night, I wrote my first letter to my aunt, in Bengali. The words came slowly, like stones placed carefully in a line, but I wrote them all the same. I told her I missed the smell of the rain and the way the evenings sounded in Kolkata. I told her that my mother was smiling more these days, and that the pendant was my most precious thing. When I sealed the letter, I felt a quiet pride. My words were imperfect, but they were mine. Months passed, the project at work grew, and so did I. I began giving talks about design and identity, how buildings, like people, can belong to more than one culture. After one of my talks, a young girl came up to me. She said her parents were from Lagos, and she always felt like she didn't fit anywhere. She told me my words made her feel seen. That night, I cried not from sadness, but from something softer. I realized I had spent years searching for belonging, and now, somehow, I was helping others find theirs. At home, my mother had started teaching Bengali again, this time in our living room. Children came twice a week, their voices filling the house. I often listened from my room, smiling when I heard them struggle with words I once found difficult too. One day, I found my mother looking through old letters. Again, the ones my father had written to her long ago. She was smiling as she read. "Do you miss him?" I asked quietly. She looked up. Yes, she said, but it's a gentle missing now, like remembering a song. I understood that too. I had begun to miss Kolkata in that same gentle way, not with pain, but with warmth. It had become a part of me, a quiet hum beneath everything I did. A few months later, my mother surprised me. She said she wanted to visit Kolkata again, this time alone. She wanted to spend a few weeks there, to see her old friends and the school again. "Will you be okay here?" she asked. "Of course," I said, though I felt a strange emptiness at the thought of her leaving. Before she left, she gave me a small notebook. "For your designs," she said, "or for your thoughts." After she was gone, the flat felt too quiet. But I found comfort in her words, written on the first page of the notebook. "Home is not a place, Anaya. It is what you build between people." I read that line every day. A week later, as I walked through the Cultural Center construction site, I thought about how much my life had changed. The walls were rising slowly, brick by brick, and the courtyard space was beginning to take shape. I imagined children running through it, their laughter echoing, their parents smiling nearby. I imagined my mother walking through, hearing the sound of her own language in a foreign land, and feeling perhaps for the first time completely at home. That night, I dreamed of her country again, but it wasn't the same dream I had as a child. This time, it wasn't far away or untouchable. It was mixed with the streets of London, the bridge over the river, the smell of bread from the bakery below our flat. I woke with tears in my eyes, but they were light, easy tears, the kind that come when you finally stop running from who you are. A few weeks later, my mother returned. She looked rested, younger somehow. She brought me a small wooden box filled with soil. "It's from the garden behind our house," she said. "You can grow something from it here." I placed the soil in a pot and planted a small mango seed. Every morning before work, I watered it. Slowly, a green shoot appeared, fragile but alive. I placed the pot near the window where the sunlight touched it most of the day. My mother laughed when she saw it. "It will never grow into a real tree in this weather," she said. "Maybe not," I replied, "but it will remind me of where it came from." Months turned into a year. The mango plant survived, small and stubborn. It stood by the window, a quiet piece of another world. Sometimes, when I sat beside it with my notebook, I imagined my grandmother's hands planting trees under the monsoon rain, and my mother walking barefoot through her childhood courtyard. And then, one evening, as the sun set over London, I caught my reflection again in the window. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing between two worlds. I was both, the river and the rain, the city and the courtyard, my name and its meaning. I whispered to myself, "This is my mother's country, and mine too." My mother smiled when I told her that. She said softly, "Then I have done something right." We sat together by the window, the little mango plant between us, the city lights flickering outside. And for a long, quiet moment, I felt everything come together, the past, the present, and all the places we carried in our hearts. I finally understood what she meant when she said, Amar Desh. My mother's country was not a place on a map. It was a memory, a feeling, a bridge that led back to love. And as I looked at her face in the soft light, I realized that maybe my story had only just begun. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.